the theme that we've selected for today's session is one of great importance, mainly because where most of us think that we've got great mental health, we may not have it. And where we may be thinking that we are struggling in terms of mental health, we may be stronger than what a great number may consider. So let's go straight into it. Join us for the live session. Right, let's look at today's learning targets. So firstly, we're going to try and define what mental wellness and what mental health is. And then we're going to be looking at some statistics in South Africa on mental health. And then we're going, because mental health is quite a broad topic, we decided to zoom in on the most common or the most spoken about form of mental ill health. And in this session, we're going to be touching a bit on stress, and we'll be looking at some of the warning signs and symptoms. We'll also be looking at depression, and we look at it as a prevalent mental disorder within in a South African context. And then we'll be looking at the effects of mental disorders, the risk factors of mental disorders, and then we'll also try look at managing our health and wellness mentally, and then we look at what is it that contributes to promoting mental wellness. You will see that it comes across as quite an intense a training session in terms of the amount of information that we'll be sharing, but we'd like that for it to be as interactive as possible, so that we try to learn from each other in as much as we're sharing some of the information with you as participants. Let's look at a quote by Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa says, "Everybody has something good inside of them. Some hide it, some neglect it, but it is there." This is a very important reminder from Mother Teresa that within the midst of all the things that may hinder and hamper on our mental illness, the underlying tone is the negativity that surrounds our our mentality. However, what is key and what is important and what should carry us through the mental disorders that we find ourselves experiencing is that there is something good in us. And sometimes we neglect it because of what seems to be speaking out at that time. Sometimes we hide it because we think that if we speak about this thing, then it will be considered being arrogant. Whatever the case may be, we must just remember that there is something that's good within us, and that goodness is what we use to take us out of all the frustrations that we find ourselves in, or to carry us through all the good that we experience with life. Did you know that your mind matters? Mental wellness is more than just the absence of mental illness. Remember, when we're looking at mental wellness, we're looking at mental wellness, it's more than just the absence of mental illness. It's a holistic type of thing where you look at the balance that you have mentally, and where you don't have the illness, what is it that sustains you and carries you through, and in making sure that you don't eventually end up with some form of mental illness. Also knowing that there's sometimes very minimal control when it comes to getting the mental illness that you find yourself experiencing. So mental wellness isn't just about whether or not you have a mental illness. There's more to it. There's element about how you build on your mental wellness, or how you what strategies you have in place to make sure that your wellness stays stronger, or it grows in such a way that you don't find yourself in a situation where you come across some form of mental illness. Right, I'm going to pause now, and I'm going to ask you to think for a minute about the day you call the worst day of your life, right? And in the chat box, I would like you to share, how did you handle it, right? You can share in a few words. You can unmute at some point when I give you the opportunity to share how you managed to handle this day that you consider the worst day of your life. So I'm going to mute myself a bit and allow people to just to share their thoughts in the chat box. I see that we've got someone who's got their hands up already, who would like to share their thought on the question. Rwanda Lunat, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it correctly. Ibrahim says, I was out of control and I couldn't control my emotions, right? Ibrahim, do you mind sharing how you handled yourself during this time? You can feel free to unmute yourself as well.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Thank you. You're always doing an awesome job.
Thank you so much.
um, I went through a very difficult time where
Mm,
basically I discovered that a partner of mine was cheating on me.
uh,
So I really went into a very deep kind of depression, and I felt that I will never be able to come out of it again. It was a
mm,
very disturbing time for me. So basically, I couldn't pick myself up. I
mm,
felt very low, and I couldn't control my emotions. I basically stepped out of my context. I wasn't the same person. And I
mm,
behaved in such a manner that today I can't believe that I behaved in that way. You know, like
mm,
screaming, shouting, arguing, uh, being abusive as well. So
mm.
it was very traumatic for me.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. And did you have any form of coping mechanism in place, or
You
did you
know what?
just take it one day at a time until you eventually got yourself out of the feeling that you were experiencing?
I had to do a lot of deep healing, a lot of deep therapy. I had to because what I'm doing is I just threw myself into lots of studying and also a lot of spirituality. And I had to look within myself and try to find out, okay, what contribution did I have towards this situation, and how would I try to avoid such kind of experiences in the future, you know? So
Yeah.
basically, I went from disempowered to self empowered. It took a long time, it took about 2 years, but I feel much better now. I feel
Okay.
much more empowered, you know? And I
Yeah.
do believe that you must love yourself. Self worth is very important.
Ah,
So you have to
beautiful.
invest in yourself.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful story there. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of yourself with us there, Rwanda.
You're
I like the
welcome.
fact, yeah, I like the fact that you speak about how you had to look deep within yourself and find coping mechanisms to get yourself out of the situation or the way that you were feeling at that time, right? So we're going to carry on with the slides, while some of you can still feel free to share some of your thoughts. But I think Ms. Abraham there just shared a bit of what today's session is about, and I think what I call the core of today's session. When you look at mental wellness and the definition that is offered by the Global Wellness Institute, it defines wellness as the active pursuit of activities, choices, lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health. So when the Global Wellness Institute defines the term defines mental wellness, they look at a holistic and balanced type of view, which includes the physical, the mental, the spiritual, the emotional, the social, and the environmental. And I think that the story that was just shared with us, that, the key to any form of mental wellness stems from within. And when we say stems from within, we look at firstly loving yourself, like Miss Abraham's just shared. And through loving yourself, you then look at yourself internally and see how you can build yourself. And what sits at the heart of building yourself is that you need to build yourself physically. We know that with exercise comes endorphins that give you this happy feeling. So when you feeling this drive that makes you feel good from exercising, then you are able to look at what is it that I can do to build myself mentally, and then you work on that. You also look at understanding that you are not on your own, and that there's a power that's above you, that's built to help you through all the challenges that you face. This is where the spiritual element comes in play. You then call upon the higher power that you believe in, whether it be it God, Yahweh, and understanding that that higher power is there to guide and to direct you, and to, in most times, protect you from all harm. And along with protecting you, I'm sure the higher power also gives you ways of coping with difficulty, because I don't think that the world comes with a promise that says there won't be any difficulties. So and from those elements, you then become emotionally stronger. And I think from realizing that, you're not the only person that's going through a particular situation at a particular time, then you build yourself around people who've gone through similar experiences. Sometimes you don't even have to join some form of club that speaks to the same type of experiences that you've had. But generally, just speaking about the challenges that you experiences means that you are actually building yourself emotionally, which links nicely to the social part of it and the environmental part of it. That you need to be in an environment that allows you to speak, that allows you to share your thoughts, that allows you to actually listen to the next person and share your experiences, so that you grow within understanding people in general, and able to, and that will enable you to then obviously deal with whatever situations that we are faced with. I think from speaking, Jay, about the balance that needs to be in place in order for us to have what we have here defined as mental wellness. What sits at the core is the importance of being aware, the awareness of wanting to have this mental wellness. because once you get this awareness of wanting to have this mental wellness, it then probes you to start looking around and looking for things that will make you want to be well, or follow the path, and eventually you'll see your life aligning to this balance that we see here, and eventually it will then influence the choices that you make, the lifestyle that you decide to live, and then it becomes that entire cycle of a balanced life. And I don't think at any point the cycle functions normally without a break. I think sometimes life throws very hard curve balls towards us, and it breaks some of these I'll call them walls that we've built around wellness. But if you build these walls whilst things are good and you're not experiencing a lot of challenges, then it becomes easier for you to sort of climb back and try to follow a routine of this mental wellness. And I'd like to think that it becomes much harder where you had not started a journey of building a mental wellness type of balance. Right, so we're going to take a moment and we're going to watch a short video on what is mental wellness.
Mental health is something we all have. It includes our thoughts and feelings about ourselves and others, how we relate to other people, how we function day to day, and how we cope with the ups and downs of life. Having good mental health is not about having no mental health problems. It's about feeling good enough about ourselves, being able to do the things that matter to us, and having the resilience to deal with the difficult situations we all experience in life. When talking about our mental health, it can be useful for us to think of it like a scale. Our mental health scale will move towards good or poor mental health, depending on what's going on in our lives and the supports we have around us. There are things that can challenge our mental health and shift the balance of our mental health scale. These challenges can come and go over time. They may be brief or may last for many years. They can leave us feeling stressed, sad, worried, lonely, overwhelmed. Mental health difficulties rarely just have one cause. They're often an understandable response to having to deal with the circumstances of our lives and things that have happened to us in the past. While there are things that challenge our mental health, there are also things that can support it too. These things won't necessarily prevent challenges to our mental health, but they can help us cope with what life throws at us. They can help us achieve balance in our mental health scale. Mental health can be complex because our experience of it is personal and unique. But we know that the more we normalise conversations about our mental health, the easier it will be for young people and adults to seek the support they need when they need it.
Right. So we realize that with mental health, we all have mental health. But what we all don't have is being able to build resilience, the awareness to build resilience. And like I was saying, while talking through the previous slide that speaks about balance, is that when things are on the other scale of mental wellness, where things are going right, the importance of making sure that you try and build the resilience in terms of making sure that, you know, physically you're taking care of yourself, you socially you are taking care of yourself, you know, you're building relationships, and you create an environment that allows for you to speak, and an environment that grows you as a person and permits you to grow in such a way that you are able to express yourself to the people around you, so that you are able to build enough resilience that when you experience the other scale of mental health, you are strong enough to use the environment that you built when things were going right to now start comforting yourself. You are building you were able to build a space that will be able to comfort you, or you've built a space that allows for you to speak and communicate how you feel. So the very space that's there to support you when things are going wrong should now be the very space that you use to sort of use for helping you throughout the tough times. And I think from the video again, what I'm able to pick up is that mental health in the negative light, where things start going wrong, what goes wrong in most instances is the feeling bad, the feeling sad, the feeling of feeling anxious, the feeling of all these the feeling of the bad feelings that come with build up in such a way that eventually they lead to some form of mental ill, if one hasn't developed a coping mechanism. And the coping mechanism also then goes back and becomes the cycle of a balance that you try to build when things are on the other side of the scale, in terms of building a good and strong
mental health is something we all have.
A good and strong mental health. You will see that as I was speaking, I was talking about, quite a number of disorders that you will experience after, especially I think this happens especially if you experiencing quite a number of negative things tumbling one on top of the other. When you look at one thing and you think that thing is going wrong, and then something else comes and you're still trying to deal with this one, something bigger comes, and then you now leave this one and you try to attack this one, and then it just becomes too much for one to control. Eventually your emotions overwhelm you, and you're not able or to control or deal with all those emotions. Then what happens is, because your system struggles with dealing with all these issues or these emotional issues that you are faced with, then your body finds a way of trying to tell you that something is wrong, because all these emotions are not dealt with. If it's one thing, you are able to say, okay, I'm focusing on this one thing. You try and do some exercises, and you try to to focus and have a support group. But when it becomes too many issues all tumbling at once, then your system sort of struggles to find a coping mechanism. This is where you find yourself now in a state where you experience disorders, and these will then come in the form of stress, anxiety, depression, psychological issues that we experience, and because humans are all different, right? It's very difficult to say that your body will come to you with this particular disorder. With some people, it just becomes stress and then it ends there. With some people, it starts off as anxiety, which leads to stress, and then eventually they find themselves in a deep depression where the anxiety is not treated or the stress is not treated. Then you find yourself with much harder disorders to deal with. I also know that with depression, you find that you see a psychologist who then sort of has sessions with you. For some, those sessions help because you're finding a space where you are, a space and an environment where you are able to share your thoughts and your feelings, and the psychologist will sort of guide you on ways that you can possibly heal from the experiences that you are experiencing. In some cases, the talks alone are not sufficient. So the psychologist will then start prescribing a certain type of medication to try help you with the stress level that you're experiencing or the depression level that you're experiencing. And with some cases, the depression becomes extreme, where you need to be booked into a psychiatric clinic, just to make sure that they build your coping mechanism or your coping skills whilst you take on medication, and you have a psychologist who visits you to try and get you out of your state of being stressed or depressed. So the level of mental ill, really no one can indicate from the onset that this person will react in this way because of the experiences that they share. And I think within the video it also says that because humans and their experiences are unique and personal, it's very difficult to then pin and draw a line and say, you know what, with this disorder, or rather with stress, then comes anxiety, or with umatapelo, she will probably get anxious. With uzodumo, she will probably fall straight into depression, because we are built differently, and we all unique, and the experiences that we go through, we see and view them differently. The impact of how those things affect us will then be different. So what we've done with this session is that we zoomed onto one particular mental illness, which is stress, and then we look at some of the behavior, some of the behavioral, cognitive, physical, and emotional signs and symptoms, so that one is able to look at some of the signs and symptoms, and then they are able to pick up that, you know what, I'm probably stressed. And because it's still the very beginning of stress, already one then starts to put together those walls that we were talking about on building a balance, where you feel you fall under, or most of these things we already know that there are signs of possibly being stressed. Then what you do is you start exercising, you start being around people, start communicating a bit more, so that it doesn't go deeper into stress, or you find yourself in a much deeper depressed type of state, which will be much harder to get out of than your general stress that would just need you to build resilience for. So under behavioral, we see that eating more or less is one of the signs or symptoms of being that indicate that you've got a bit of stress. Sleeping too much or too little, and sometimes I must say that with these signs and symptoms, you've got to be very aware, self-aware, because sometimes you eat a lot because it's winter, and not necessarily because you are stressed. But you need to make sure that it's more than 5 of these signs and symptoms that you're experiencing at the same time before deciding that a person is actually stressed. You'll find that people who are stressed also like isolating themselves, because that they feel that possibly they will burden the next person with their issues, and they will procrastinate on their responsibilities, and where a person is using alcohol or cigarettes, they will use them to relax themselves more often than they would under normal circumstances. And they are prone to crying. This will obviously be for people who are more emotional than others. Under cognitive, we find that they experience some memory problems, inability to concentrate, and poor judgment. They always have anxious thoughts racing through their mind, and it becomes a constant thing, constantly worrying, lack of motivation. Even when we speak about the positives, all they ever see are the negatives of a situation, and then inability to suppress their negative thoughts. So even when we try to show them the light, they will insist on seeing the negative side of things, and they will have a loss of interest on what is happening around them. Whereas under normal circumstances, they are keen on knowing and understanding what is happening. And then in in terms of the physical, they experience aches and pains. Some will experience diarrhea or constipation. And then in some, they'll experience nausea and dizziness, or chest pains and rapid heartbeats. Some will experience a low sex drive, and then will have frequent colds and loss of energy. I'm tempted to say that I'm stressed because I've been experiences bounces of coughing from time to time, and my colleagues would share that I'm probably experiencing quite a lot of stress. And then emotionally, they would then be moody and very irritable. And then they will also be very agitating and not be able to relax. And I think from the anxiety that they have, then they are not able to relax. In most instances, they will feel overwhelmed or lonely, or rejected, or want to be isolated. They will sometimes be in denial that they are experiencing some form of stress. And with some people, it will come across as actually being nervous or hopeless. So I think from the list of stress signs and symptoms, a lot of them fall on the side of being hopeless more than anything. And not being able to see any kind of positivity in any situation. So if the mind moves you more towards that type of thinking, is where I should think one should start worrying. In fact, not even worrying, but trying to build on some form of coping mechanism in the form of building a stronger spiritual type of lifestyle, being around an environment that permits them to communicate. And I think what's nice with this list of signs and warning signs is that, where you feel that you have a colleague or a friend who's experiencing most of these symptoms, you then lend an ear to that colleague, so that you try and support them through the process. And where the colleague or friend does not realize that they actually undergoing stress, you could actually be their eye and sort of speak to them until they realize that, actually my friend is possibly undergoing stress, and then try to talk to them until they seek help. Now let's look at the push behind us wanting to have such a session. I think the biggest trick or the biggest trigger was that when we look at stats in South Africa regarding mental health, we realize that 1/5 of South African will experience a depressive disorder at least once during their lifetime. So that's a lot of people if we have 1/5 of all South Africans at least experiencing a depressive sort of disorder in their lifetime, this simply means that me, myself, or you at some point will experience some form of depressive disorder. And being aware, creating the awareness around these disorders means that we are better equipped to understand ourselves when we experience any of these symptoms that we've just spoken about, and are better to sort of start preparing for when we are faced with bigger challenges, and knowing that, you know, that constantly we've got to build on those on those walls that speak to the balance that we need as human beings. And this will be then your physical element, will be your your environment element, your spiritual and the social spaces that you find yourself in should be ones that are more building more than anything, because in that case, when you find yourself in a situation, you've at least got people who will realize and be able to support you more effectively. What we also saw was that 16.5% of South Africans suffer from common mental health problems. So whilst we're looking at 1/5 who will experience at some point, already 16.5 are already experiencing some form of mental health problems. And then we see that 23 South Africans will commit suicide on a daily basis. 23 people will commit suicide, and the root of it all stems from mental ill health. So it's important that we are aware, and the more aware we are, then we are better equipped to deal with ourselves, one, or anyone who is close to us is able to be. We are able to support them better. Sorry. Now we'll zoom on the younger group. I think because we are in the youth month, it makes sense for us to just zoom a bit on the youth. And what we are looking at is globally, and in South Africa, approximately 20% of teens have a mental health disorder, but the majority are either not detected or untreated. So we're realizing that the youth are stressed from school, from the period that they are in school. I would like to think that this group will be, a big chunk of it will be in high school, and moving towards tertiary. Those kids, a great number of them are stressed, and most of them go on unnoticed, undiagnosed, unsupported. And yeah, because there is no awareness around mental health, they're not exposed to people who possibly be able to support them. And I think most of them would be supported in the event that they at some point were actively involved, perhaps in community centers, or they are actively involved in school clubs where they are meant to be focusing on sports and things like that. So unless these kids are involved in some form of activity within their communities, then it means they suffer alone, with no one to guide them, with no one to support them. And I think as they grow older, they grow into a much deeper form of stress, and even into depression, because they've carried the burden for so long and nobody around them is able to support them. Then they find themselves in a situation where they can't carry the stress anymore, and they fall into deep into a deeper type of depression. Whereas if we create an awareness around mental health, then we try and resolve such issues at a much earlier age. We see that 24% of youths surveyed between grade 8 and 11 had experienced feeling of depression, hopelessness, and sadness, while a further 21% had attempted suicide at least once. So I think this covers the talk that I just touched on, that it's mostly learners who are in high school moving towards tertiary. But what's alarming is the fact that 21% have attempted to commit suicide at least once. I think that this is so real. I know I've had two of my friends who tried to commit suicide when I was in high school. And if I'm one person who's experienced such, I'm sure that everybody who's joined the session knows someone who's close to them who has actually tried to commit suicide. In my case, both my friends tried to commit suicide, and by the grace of God, they were saved in time and they didn't die. But how many of these cases go unnoticed? The children, commit suicide and are successful at that. So it's definitely not easy being a teenager, especially nowadays. There's pressures from all around. Sometimes it's tough to avoid feeling stress, and pressure can build up in many areas of life. So it's family, it's school, it's finding a job, it's friends. And, when you listen to the news about the realities of South African youth in South Africa, it is very, it can be very depressing. However, in the same breath, when you look at the opportunities that are available for young people, we are still able to give hope to our younger colleagues who are feeling depressed. Worrying about these pressures are normal, so it's normal to worry a bit about, I'm studying now. When I complete my studies, will I be employed? Will I not be employed? But feeling very sad, hopeless, and worthless might be a sign of mental health. So it's okay to worry about it for a short while. It shouldn't be something that pushes you towards thinking that it's the end and be it, and that there is no there won't be any progress. Depression is one of the prevalent mental disorders in South Africa, and sadly, women are 2 times more likely to suffer from depression. Right, 70% of South Africans who attempted suicide had a mental disorder. So most suicidal cases that we see in South Africa, a great number of those stem from mental disorder. Research suggests that as many as 12% of South African university students experience anything from a moderate to a severe type of depression. So people, so our colleagues who are busy studying are also worried. They worry, I think, about their studies. I'm sure worrying about their studies doesn't push them towards depression, because they know that, if I worry about my studies, the only way to make it right is for me to study. I study, I pass, then I go right. But the concern mostly, I think, is about what happens when I complete and I get home. Does it mean that I'll be employed? Is it a guarantee that me completing this course will get me a job? So those are the biggest concerns around young people currently. For every person who commits suicide, there's a suicide, 10 have attempted. So for every successful suicidal incident, 10 have attempted. So 10 are saved, but 1 goes through. But that's a big number of people dying because of mental disorders. So we see, obviously, from the stats that a whole lot of that, stress, which leads to depression, which leads to suicide, are stats that are alarming, honestly speaking. And we need to speak more about mental health, because that's where the root cause is of all these suicide cases that we see. Now let's look at some of the most famous and well-known people who have shared their stories around battling with mental ill health. Minnie Dlamini is well known, and she's been speaking openly about her experience with depression after dating the soccer player. She's been very open about her struggles in moving on from that relationship right into her married life. And even though she's got the fancy life, and one would assume that, having all these material things sort of, tick off the box in terms of you having a good life. But it shows actually that mental illnesses, mental illness doesn't choose who you are or what you have. It's about the experiences that you have in life. And unfortunately, experiences are not based on the haves or not haves. So whether you have or not, you will experience challenges. Sometimes it may not even be financial challenges. Sometimes it's challenges that are bigger than finances. And in this case, Umini advocates for that her personal life, things that she thought would go right, when they started falling apart, it didn't matter that she had money. Even the resources, the financial resources she had, couldn't stop the depression that she was actually experiencing. The other person that is very well known, and I think the misconception is that because Trevor is a comedian, he makes people laugh. It means that he's happy. He doesn't have problems. Reality is he also has his fair share of life challenges. And life challenges, as we all know, are part of life as it may be. And it's in dealing with life that we come across these mental ills. And sometimes they become overwhelming. And I would like to think that, when you become a public figure, the pressure becomes much more than we imagine as ordinary people, who live our lives from day to day in a normal way, and there isn't much camera following us. For them, the pressure is immense. And when you look at Trevor and the role that he plays internationally, one would never have thought that Trevor has depression. However, he also speaks out a lot about it. In fact, I have a friend who has a very similar character to Trevor. And the other day he said to me, you know what, Matapelo, my character sometimes is actually to block the character that most people know, in terms of, being able, when my friend is in the room, everybody laughs, forgets their problems. Reality, he says, the reality is, whilst I'm making everyone laugh, I am experiencing the worst internally. And he says, the people who make other people laugh, in most cases, they're not taken care of in terms of their emotional well-being. As a result, they suffer in silence. And I love the fact that Trevor Noah speaks openly about that, because it says, where you create the environment for you to speak out, then the environment helps you, overcome the situations that you face. So instead of Trevor just bottling it all in, and us hearing that Trevor fell off the third story of a building, he decided to turn the tables, because he realized that, even though he's about making us feel good and happy. He also needs some form of emotional support. And by opening up like this, he then created that space that would support him when it came to his state of depression. So, what are the risk factors? So the risk factors are as indicated on the screen. Some people who have a family history of mental ill are likely to experience mental illness. So if there's mental illness within the family, then there are chances of you actually experiencing them as well. And then stressful life situations such as financial problems, a loved one's death or divorce. So something that happens hard when you're not expecting it, then, that's also a risk factor. An ongoing chronic medical condition such as diabetes. So you sick with this one disease, you're trying to control it. You're trying your best to see that it's controlled, but not knowing whether or not you will get over the other side of the condition keeps you stressed most of the time, and then it may you may experience stress or depression over time. People who have experienced brain damage as a result of serious injury, so some traumatic injury that you got from on the brain. So like a horrible car accident or something very traumatic happens to the brain and it gets damaged, that also could be a risk factor. Then there's traumatic experiences such as rape and assault. Then you can also experience them from the use of alcohol or drugs. And then a childhood history of abuse or neglect. So these are some things that happen over a longer period of time. Having few friends or a few healthy relationships. So sometimes we keep these relationships, but where they're not building us, then they are doing the opposite. They are harming us. And then if you've experienced a previous mental illness, so in some instances you've experienced stress, you try to get over it, and over a period of time, that stress then leads to something much deeper, like depression. So those would be then some of the risk factors. And I think when you look at the stats that we were talking about earlier, and how they start from things as small as worrying about your finances, that could lead to you being stressed, and then eventually, because you're not coping with that stress, and you carry it for years, then it leads to depression. And because you are in this dark space, eventually you commit suicide, and then that becomes the end of you. Because death is the final part of mental health, it is important to look at people like Kensani who eventually commit suicide. Kensani sought for help prior to her death by reaching out to Ukeri Promel from Kolifasi, an organization dealing with various issues, including sexual assault and things like that. So sometimes you reach out, and if help doesn't come at a time where you are about to make the worst mistake of your life, then we find ourselves in a situation like Kenzani found herself, where she eventually gives in the towel and lets go. I have a cousin of mine who was diagnosed with depression and was actually in a psychiatric clinic. And he was, when I was speaking to him, because when we realized that he was sick, he's always been like a very quiet child. And we understood when we saw him, he was smiling, couldn't show that there were things that were wrong with him. And he was saying to me, he being depressed is like sitting in a very deep and dark hole, and there's no sign of a staircase, or there's no ray of sun that you can see as a promise of hope. So you stay there until someone is there to peep in the hole as a ray of light. And if you're not fortunate enough to have people who are aware of you going wrong, or of something of seeing something wrong within you, then you stuck in that dark hole, and the next thing that you're going to do is going to commit suicide. And he says in his case, he was lucky because he's surrounded by people who constantly peep in when he is at the pits of the hole. And then they are able to encompass him and provide the staircase of light in the form of activities with friends, where he goes out hiking, and in the form of social gatherings with family, where he's able to speak out about some of the experiences that actually lead him towards the dark valley that he finds himself in, so that we as family don't find ourselves triggering him and leading him into this dark hole again. So we need it when we have people who in our lives who are experiencing mental ill health. We are there to support, and also, most importantly, I think, make sure that we protect our loved ones from falling into this deep dark hole that they cannot let themselves out. So the responsibility is much greater on us who are supporting the people with ill health. So what are the effects of a mental disorder? It's unhappiness, decreased enjoyment of life. There'll be a lot of family conflicts, relationship difficulty, social isolation, problem with alcohol and drugs. I think most of these effects we've spoken about, I think, is listed under the signs and symptoms of being depressed. And then how do you manage health and wellness? I think this slide also speaks out to the balance that we spoke about earlier. I think we spoke at length about building these walls of sustaining a well-balanced type of a good mental health. And as part of that was making sure that we've got good physical health. We look after our finances as far as possible. We are intellectually challenged in a good way. So look for things that will challenge you intellectually, so that you don't wait for things that come to trouble you, but look out for those challenges. And then looking out sort of becomes a driver, instead of it becoming a challenge. You challenge yourself, and you drive yourself to building a resistance. You must be able to play and enjoy life. And you must have a good social surrounding. So the friends that you keep, you must build a good spiritual type of environment for yourself, so that there's things that you've got control over, and there's things that you do not have control over. So we need to have the serenity to realize the difference and accept that some things we can't control, but ask God to give us the strength to carry what we have control over. And then lastly, what we have on screen, and I would like each one of us to just take a quick a shot of these emergency helplines in the event that we experience a friend who is experiencing a mental ill health. These are some of the numbers that we've managed to find, and we can call for support. And where things are going wrong, these are the numbers that we can use moving forward.